Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Man, I feel like it's been forever since I've actually been in front of the camera, so a little nervous. But okay, so today I wanted to talk about because with the whole Timothy Jones case where he was trying to, plead insanity, and of course he lost. But I kind of wanted to talk about like the difference between legal insanity and clinical insanity. So clinical insanity is actually not even a medical diagnosis. Insanity is a legal term, not a medical one. So if you look up insanity, you find like multiple definitions, but they all kind of mean the same thing. So I'm going to read you. There's quite a few different definitions of insanity. So I'm going to read you a few of them. Okay. So one of the definitions of insanity is mental illness of such a severe nature that one cannot distinguish between fantasy and reality, cannot conduct his or her affairs due to psychosis, or is subject to uncontrollable impulsive behavior. Insanity is a concept discussed in court to help distinguish guilt from innocence. It's informed by mental health professionals, but the term today is primarily legal and not psychological, like I was saying before. There's no insane diagnosis listed in the DSM. And there's also no nervous breakdown. Like those aren't diagnoses that are actually listed in the DSM. So it's a little more complicated than that because medically it's, you look for things like psychosis or hallucinations, delusional, but it's not as easy like with legal. The legal insanity, it's more, well, I'm going to go through the different defenses that, there's 4 different ones that I'm going to get to of ways where you could, win or be acquitted of your crime due to insanity. So anyway, so the closest medical definition is, that the best medical definition I would say for insanity is a term referring to severe mental illness or psychosis. And like I said, I'm going to read you a couple of the other definitions for insanity because there's so many different ones. I mean, they all kind of mean the same thing, obviously, but I'm just by giving you a few of the other definitions, it's to kind of give you an idea because it's such a somewhat hard concept to really understand. And I think that's why it's so hard to prove it in court. It's so hard to really know, so that's why I'm going to read you a few definitions and then just so you can get a better grasp of maybe what that would entail, Okay, so here's another definition of insanity. It refers to those mental illnesses that are of such a serious or debilitating nature as to interfere with one's capability of functioning within the legal limits of society and performing the normal activities of daily living. Okay, so like I said before, the term is used so little in medicine, but it might equate to psychosis. So you might hear people using that medically, using the term insanity kind of as the same as psychosis. You know what I'm saying? So, but insanity is so much more than just that. So that's why it's so hard to define it medically. Legally, they try to do their best they can, as far as a lot has to do with if the person was aware of, right or wrong, and they knew they were breaking the law, or if they didn't have control over their actions. But like I said, I'm going to go through some of those in more depth. And then here's a simple definition of insanity. I mean, I know it's not simple, but like here's one of the shorter, kind of more basic definition says insanity is a legal term pertaining to a defendant's ability to determine right from wrong when a crime is committed. So a lot of the 4 different insanity defenses, most of them are kind of built around like, were they able to determine right from wrong? But there is 2 of them actually. Well, like I said, I'll go over them. Okay. And another reason that insanity, as far as is different than the legal insanity, is kind of different than clinical insanity, even though there really isn't a clinical insanity, there's no disorder diagnosis called insane or anything like that. But like as far as the legal insanity, it's all about the laws. You know what I'm saying? It's all about knowing right from wrong. The right is when you act according to the law. The wrong is when you break the law. So there's not really like a moral, but laws are based on morals. You know what I'm saying? They are kind of morally right or wrong. But I hope you understand what I'm saying here. If you're looking at somebody clinically or, medically or whatever, it's like, if you're looking at somebody clinically, it's like, you look more into it. Like, it's not all about just the laws, but when you go as far as illegal insanity, and when you have to look at it that way, it's all about the laws, and if you were aware of them, and if you were, it's not about like your values and morals and your personality, or like your who you are. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but it's all, so you have to be able to distinguish right from wrong, as far as what's punishable by law. You know what I'm saying? What's wrong that's punishable by law, rather than like if it just goes against something that you believe in or your family or your culture. That's where it's kind of different, because with legal insanity, it's just all about the laws of where, whatever country you're in, whatever state you're in, whatever those laws are, and you being aware of those, just the laws of right and wrong. Okay, so I know that kind of it sounds like well, like duh, but like, so there's a hereditary insanity, which I know Timothy Jones, his mom was schizophrenic, and but of course he did, they did bring up, his brain injury, and I think that was one of the bigger points that they were hitting on, because of that injury he has and the damage that, that it did to his brain and stuff. So, but they're saying like hereditary insanity will not relieve you of your crime unless the accused himself shows insanity. So just because, his family was insane, and, or even, actually, even that injury, that head injury, it kind of falls into this, because just because number one, his mom was kind of probably diagnosed with psychosis, hallucinations, she was schizophrenic. So maybe there were periods where she could have been, classified as insane, So, so not only, so just because, hereditary, he might have got some of those genes and he might be schizophrenic. And because that injury he had on his head from the accident, it shows that, man, that very well could cause insanity. That very well could cause some kind of damage to his brain where he could have been insane or temporarily insane, not know right from wrong, to be in a state of psychosis or whatever. Even if he is diagnosed with schizophrenia, like, so he gets diagnosed and they think he has that, and also, his head injury, they see, wow, he did do some damage to his brain, and look, he does have this injury. Just because they could show like all of these could cause insanity, but the mere fact that the cause existed, which could produce insanity, is not sufficient to establish criminal irresponsibility. So just because it could, and he's got so many factors against him, or I should say for him, to win this defense, this insanity defense, but just because there's enough factors that show that he could have been insane, he could have done enough damage, he could be schizophrenic, he could have, have brain damage that could have caused insanity under other people, it could have very well caused that. But just because that it existed, that it was possible, doesn't mean that it produced that. Does that make sense? See, I'm not really explaining this good. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. So obviously that's what, the jury came to that conclusion. And just because, all these factors could have done it. Yeah, they're very well, it could have caused another person that enough damage to be insane. But all the evidence they produced that it did not affect him in that way at that moment when he committed the crime, it did not have that effect. They did not feel like he was insane, that he didn't know, right from wrong, because that he, see, there's two different factors that he would have had to have: the mental defect, which he looks like he probably did have a mental defect. Maybe he was schizophrenic and he had the brain damage. But the second element that is needed for the insanity defense is him not knowing right from wrong, like not being able to distinguish between the two. And then there's a couple other different ones, so I'll wait till we get there. But there's another defense where it's more where you can't control your impulses. Either you have to have a mental defect and you can't control your impulses, which, it obviously didn't show that either. And that one's a little bit less popular. But like I said, I'm getting ahead of myself here. Okay, so I like this saying, or this explanation. Responsibility depends upon power and intellect, not upon feeling. The culprit is punished, not just because he knew good from evil, but because he voluntarily did the evil, having the power to choose the good. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you the 4 variations of the insanity defense that currently exist today. Okay, so the first one and the most popular one is called the McNaughton insanity defense. It's also called the right-wrong test, and it's the most common insanity defense used in the US. So this defense is cognitive, and it focuses on the defendant's awareness rather than the ability to control conduct. So the defense requires 2 elements, like I was saying. The first is the defendant must be suffering from a mental defect at the time he or she committed the crime. Second, because of the mental defect, the defendant did not know either the nature and quality of the criminal act or that the act was wrong. Okay, so if you guys want to check out where a defendant actually won, I don't want to use the word won because, how do you win when you are, I won being insane, insanity, like that's not a win. I know that, but I should say where the defendant was acquitted by reason of an insanity, by using the McNaughton insanity defense. Check out Andrea Yates. So Andrea Yates is a diagnosed schizophrenic. In 2001, she killed 5 of her children by drowning them one by one in her bathtub. She was, like I was saying, she was initially convicted of murder, but then later acquitted by reason of insanity. So right after she drowned her 5 kids, one by one, in the bathtub, she calls 911 right away. And she tells the 911 operator that her children are dead. And when the law enforcement gets there, she told them that she killed her children so they could leave the earth and enter heaven. So she had a history of mental illness. She had postpartum depression. She was diagnosed schizophrenic. She had previously attempted suicide. So she used the McNaughton insanity defense. And so if you remember, there has to be 2 elements. There's 2 elements to the McNaughton insanity defense. The first element was suffer from a mental defect at the time that he or she commits the crime. And so, she did suffer from a mental defect. Not only was she schizophrenic, but she had postpartum depression. So she had the mental defect. So that's one element. So the second element is a little bit tougher to prove, So the second element, if you remember, is The defendant did not know either the nature and quality of the criminal act or that the act was wrong. Okay? So like we said, Yates, she suffered from schizophrenia, and so that was her mental defect. And then, in addition, there was no evidence that she knew her conduct was wrong, such as attempted to escape or cover it up. So, they were able to prove in the court that she didn't know the crime that she committed was wrong. She didn't try to escape it. She didn't try to cover it up. She thought actually what she was doing was helping her children. They needed to leave Earth so they could go into heaven. And she obviously, was so detached from reality that she didn't know what she was doing was wrong. She didn't know she was breaking the law at the time when she did it. She thought she was actually, helping her kids. And, I know it's more deeper and goes more in depth than just as simple as what I'm telling you. But like, for instance, she didn't try to cover it up. She caught him right away. Because she didn't realize what she did was even wrong. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sure there'd be a lot of people that would disagree with that. And it's a controversial issue, because a lot of people would, I'm sure there are a lot of people that don't think that, that believe that she was insane and that she didn't know what she was doing or was wrong. But the jury, given the evidence, they found that, no, she was insane by legal definition, using that McNaughton defense. The defense were able to show the jury by the evidence they produced that, they were able to convince them that she didn't know. And not only did she have that mental defect, but that she didn't realize what she was doing was wrong. So that's just one of the cases that actually won, or that was actually acquitted for the reason of insanity. So the second insanity defense that currently exists today is called irresistible impulse insanity defense. So this defense is actually rejected by most states and the federal government and has lost its popularity over the years. Okay, so the focus of this defense is on the defendant's awareness and the defendant's ability to control his or her conduct. So the first element is the same as the McNaughton. The defendant must suffer from a mental defect or disease of the mind. However, the second element adds the concept of free choice. If the defendant cannot control his or her conduct because of the mental defect or disease, the defendant's conduct is excused even if the defendant understands that the conduct is wrong. So even if he or she knows the difference between right or wrong, they could still be acquitted. They could still win, with this defense. As long as they are able to prove, the defense is able to prove that the defendant cannot control his or her conduct because of the mental defect or disease. So, they have to be able to prove that he had no control, he or she had no control because of, the mental defect that this person has. They had no control over their actions. Even if they're aware of it being wrong, they can't control it. So it fits, the title, the name of it, Irresistible Impulse Insanity, is a perfect name for it because they can't resist that impulse that they have, so that's that one. But like you said, that one is rarely used. It's lost its popularity. Most states it's rejected. They don't, it's, I could kind of see though, because think about how hard that would be to prove. I guess even the McNaughton would be hard to prove too. I guess it would be just as hard to prove that. Well, maybe not. Like I'm thinking like to prove that the person is aware of right or wrong, compared to prove that to prove that the person isn't aware of right or wrong. You know what I'm saying? As far as the McNaughton rule, that second element of the McNaughton rule, and then the second element of this rule is not knowing right from wrong, but not able to control the impulse. So, I mean, both things would be hard to prove. It's just, because you could say, so yeah, you could see why the defense has a job to do when they use one of these defenses, insanity defenses. So, okay, so the third insanity defense is the substantial capacity test. Okay, so the substantial capacity test was created by the Model Penal Code, which was completed in 1962. Okay, but by 1980, half of the states and the federal government adopted the substantial capacity test. However, in 1982, John Hinckley successfully claimed insanity using this defense in his federal trial for the attempted murder of then President Ronald Reagan. Discontent at this non-guilty verdict caused many states and the federal government to switch from the substantial capacity test to the more inflexible McNaughton standard. So the substantial capacity test is as follows. A person is not responsible for criminal conduct if at the time of such conduct as a result of mental disease or defect, he lacks substantial capacity either to appreciate the criminality, wrongfulness of his conduct, or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law. This defense also has two elements, okay? And like the first two defenses I've mentioned so far, the first element also requires the defendant to have a mental disease or defect. And the second element combines the cognitive standard with free choice. So unlike the McNaughton insanity defense, the substantial capacity test relaxes the requirements for complete inability to understand or know the difference between right and wrong. Instead, the defendant must lack substantial but not total capacity. So, with McNaughton, that second element is complete inability to understand or know the difference between right or wrong. They can't have any ability. They do not know the difference, okay? But for this one, it doesn't have to be complete inability. It just has to be they lack substantial capacity. So they could still have some capacity. They could have some ability to recognize the difference between right and wrong, but they just lack some of it, not just a substantial, but not total, okay? So that's one part of it. And then in addition, you remember the irresistible impulse insanity defense? The second element of that is that they lack ability to control their conduct, to control their action. They can't resist, so they lack complete ability to. They say as control conducts, but like control their actions, to resist their impulses. They lack it. They can't control it. Okay, remember. So that's the irresistible impulse insanity. But with this one, unlike irresistible impulse insanity defense, the defendant must lack a substantial but not total ability to control conduct to the requirements of law. So they just have to lack a substantial amount of the ability to control their actions, but not a total amount. So think about how hard that would be. Because where is that line? Like, how can you say, well, that with laws, it's usually like black or white. It's like bad or good. No, this is right, this is wrong. But with this, it's like, this would be so tough because it's like, they knew it was wrong, but a part of them knew. How do you prove that? I knew it was wrong, but a part of me didn't know it was wrong. You could say anybody could fall into that, part of me didn't know it was wrong, or part, it just has to be tough. Or like, I could control, think about like impulses. They are hard to control. That's why they're like impulse. You want to do it, but like, so I feel like anybody could fall under that, because you want to do it, but something stops you because because you're able to, stop, but like sometimes you do things that you shouldn't, because you don't have that complete control of your impulses. You know what I'm saying? Nobody does. So that's why we make mistakes and we do stupid things. We do bad things for our health. We do bad things. We learn from our, I guess, mistakes. But what I'm trying to say is like not, I wouldn't, I can't say any, it'd be hard to say like anybody has complete control over their impulses, So we all lack a little bit of ability to control our conduct. You know what I'm saying? But that part that we do have control is the part that we hope stops us from doing certain things. But like, of course, some of us do things that we can't control, but yet I don't know. I'm trying to explain like how hard this would be to not to prove, because like I said, like we all would fall under this one. Well, not the mental defect, I guess, but like the second thing, like, well, the first one about being aware of, I guess the ability to know the difference between right and wrong. Yeah, I guess, that one's maybe a little bit easier, but I mean, when you open that up to like, oh, just a substantial amount, but not total capacity, I mean, you are opening up too many possibilities. That's too many, it'd be too easy. Like anybody, I feel like anybody would be able to prove a little bit like, oh, well, I had a, substantial, I lack some, substantial ability to control my conduct, Well, of course, if you committed a crime, anybody that committed a crime would lack some of their ability to control their conduct, their impulses, their actions, because that's why you're there, because you did lack that control. So that's why you committed it. You know what I'm saying? But the fact that you didn't lack a complete, you didn't lack the total ability to control that, means you still had free choice. You know what I'm saying? Just like we all still have free choice. All of us sane people. You know what I'm saying? So you shouldn't be able to, get this. You shouldn't be able to win, be acquitted for your crime by insanity, reason of insanity, if with this one. I don't like this one because, of course, you lack some ability to control your actions, or you wouldn't be in that situation. You wouldn't have committed a crime. Okay? But see, the difference between insanity is like, for example, that irresistible impulse insanity defense, at least with that one, it's saying that you lack complete ability to control your conduct, okay? So basically that's saying like you have no free choice, because you can't you can't control your actions. So it's like you're not choosing, you have no choice. You know what I'm saying? But when you take that complete ability away from that, when you say, oh, well, you did have some ability, I don't even care if it's a little bit, that gives you that free choice back. Do you guys following me? So if you have that free choice, then no, then you shouldn't be able to get away, you shouldn't be acquitted of the crime for insanity. The minute you take away, or you give you somewhat of free choice, and the minute you say that you have at least a little bit of the ability to control it, that's giving you back your free choice, that you chose that, and you could have chose otherwise. You know what I'm saying? So that one, I don't like that one. Now, as far as the the first part where it says you must lack substantial inability to understand or know the difference between right and wrong. I mean, I guess if you could look at that the same way. So yeah, so I don't know. So I guess that's good that they switched. Most states and the federal government uses more the McNaughton insanity defense. So okay, so the fourth and last insanity defense is the Durham insanity defense, okay, which is only used in New Hampshire. So it has been the established insanity defense in New Hampshire since the late 1800s. So the Durham test is also called the Durham rule or the produce test. So it was adopted by the Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia in the case of Durham versus U.S. Okay, the defense set forth in that case is as follows: accused is not criminally responsible if his unlawful act was the product of mental disease or mental defect. Okay, so in general, the Durham insanity defense relies on ordinary principles of proximate causation. The defense has two elements. First, just like the other three defenses, the defendant must have a mental disease or defect, okay? These terms are not specifically defined in the Durham case, though, so it kind of makes it a little bit more confusing, making it extremely difficult to apply, okay? The second element has to do with causation, okay? So if the criminal conduct is caused by the mental disease or defect, then the conduct should be excused under the circumstance. Okay, so with all that considered, the insanity defense is used in just roughly 1% of the U.S. criminal prosecutions and is successful in only about a quarter of these cases. So, a defendant suffering from schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders has a better chance at an insanity defense than a person with a personality disorder. So, and also mood disorders, for example, like major and postpartum depression and bipolar disorders may also qualify for an insanity defense, if it meets all the other factors. But convincing a judge or jury of a criminal defendant's insanity isn't easy. So, we all know, that Timothy Jones Jr., he lost that battle. Is he schizophrenic? Probably, but that's not the only factor. So he had that mental defect or disease, so not only could he possibly been schizophrenic, but also he had that, brain injury where, from the car accident. So just because he had some of the factors that could have caused, insanity does not make them cause it. Just because he has that, and it's like I was saying before that, okay, well, he's schizophrenic, and there's some people that's, have schizophrenic, they don't, do fall under the insanity, legal insanity. And he has this brain injury, and, but that doesn't mean that doesn't necessarily mean that he was insane. So, that didn't cause him to be insane. It could cause others, it could have caused others, but for, his specific case, by the evidence that was produced by the defense, they didn't feel like that he felt, like that he was insane by the legal terms, and it's really hard to win that defense. I mean, it would be hard to prove that, because just like, as far as our judicial system, where it's like a person is innocent and has to be proved guilty. You know what I'm saying? So that you have to look at him innocent, and then you have to prove it the other way. You have to prove that he's guilty. Just like insanity is like the person is sane and has to be proved insane. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like the burden of proof lies on the defense. They have to prove that. So, I mean, that's a tough thing to do because it's such a kind of, it's not like a black or white type of thing. There's so much gray area and so much, like, for instance, if you just look on the surface, oh, he's schizophrenic. Oh, he has a brain injury. Okay, wow, yeah, that would make sense. Maybe, he was insane. But that doesn't necessarily mean that. You have to look deeper and really get into it. And still, I mean, even, really analyzing it and, and really analyzing him and then presenting that to a jury, just because, like, one psychologist could say one thing, or another could say another, depending on which side they're working for. But also, it's like you said, it's not like a black or white thing, because insanity, it's not in the DSM as a disorder. So you need a psychologist or psychiatrist, to testify, that, how they feel, if they feel like he's insane. But it's not a medical term. It's not a medical diagnosis. It's not a disorder. It's not in the DSM. So, yeah, they're professional and experts in diagnosing, people with disorders and, trying to, go by what the DSM and trying to diagnose people right or wrong. And I mean, you still have your issues with that, but let's say like a person is perfect. I know it's not possible for anybody to be perfect at the diagnosis, and every time it's just right on, because it's with psychology, with mental disorders, you're kind of dealing with a lot of because think about it, as much as you want to be as objective as possible, even the patient, like you go in, to talk to a psychologist, and the psychologist is trying to be objective as possible. And you, the patient, because number one, the psychologist, as much as they try to be objective, of course they are going to be influenced by personal feelings and experiences. Even if you try your hardest not to, you can't help it, because that's you. That's how you see it through your eyes. It's almost like impossible to be completely objective when it comes to studying human behavior, human thoughts, human mind, human emotions. How can you possibly be completely objective? I'm sorry, you can't. Now with other sciences, I feel like there's a better opportunity, because it's like, you could have, you have facts, you're dealing with concrete things, you know what I'm saying? But when we're talking about human emotions and feelings and thoughts and memories, they're not like a concrete thing. They're not like a, I don't know, it's hard to explain what I'm talking about, but it's just hard. So it's like, it's not always right, because everybody's different, and it's, nobody could possibly know every single thing about a person when it comes to like, and even that, the patient doesn't even know sometimes where things are coming from and why they're acting this way, or why they think this way, or, you know what I'm saying? So how is somebody else going to try to figure it out? And no, I mean, they try their best, but what I'm saying is like, what my point was is, let's say, and this isn't, this would never be the case, but let's just say let's say there was a psychologist that was perfect, and he could diagnose anybody with whatever they have. He was always perfect. It was always 100% right. And, anybody could come in and he would know exactly, he would study him and know exactly, go through the DSM, okay, and know exactly what their disorder was. Okay, let's say that, okay, we have that guy and he's analyzing Timothy Jones, to see if he's insane or not. Okay? But insanity is not a medical term. So my point is, like, for him to come up and testify and say that he's insane or not insane, it's a legal term to know if the defendant was able to know the difference between right and wrong, right? So it's not like a diagnosis that this perfect doctor that could diagnose any disorder in the DSM. Well, insanity is not in the DSM. Psychosis is in the DSM. So insanity is not in the DSM. So he's an expert expert psychologist, psychiatrist, can diagnose whatever. But insanity is not in the DSM. It's not a disorder. It's a legal term. You know what I'm saying? So even if he was perfect, like I said, and always diagnosed people the right way, which is not even possible, but he's never missed it. Always got it right as far as diagnosis. But how is he going to diagnose something that is not even in a DSM? You know what I'm saying? It's not a disorder. So that's what I'm saying. That's why it's so tough. Yeah, they bring in psychologists, experts to try to give their opinion. So basically kind of what they do is they, psychosis. They could diagnose certain things like, okay, so is he psychotic? Was he in a state of psychosis? Which even if the defendant was psychotic at the moment, does not meet the legal requirements to say, okay, he did have like a psychotic break. Okay, so they have okay, you could prove, okay, he had a psychotic episode at the time. They could examine, let's say, Timothy Jones. Okay, yeah, he had a psychotic episode. At the time he was in a psychotic episode. He experienced psychosis. Because his head injury, caused some kind of psychosis. So yeah, he'd be qualified to say that, to analyze to see if he was. But just being in a state of psychosis, does not still make you legally insane. Okay, it's a part of it, but it's not the whole thing. Okay, so just saying, like, he had a psychotic break, he was in that state, does not make him legally insane. Okay, because it doesn't necessarily mean that he didn't know right from wrong, or some of the other, the four defenses, which McNaughton insanity defense is the most popular, widely used one. But anyway, so let's say, yeah, he had that mental defect. He was suffering from a psychotic break, or suffering from psychosis, if it was temporarily or more chronic, or whatever. So maybe he was experiencing some form of psychosis. Okay, but that doesn't mean that he was legally insane. What that needs to be proven in the court of law to make you legally insane. So that, like I said, it's just a part of it, but it's not the whole thing. So so let's say he could say, okay, yeah, he was suffering from psychosis. So psychosis is like where the defendant or a patient would suffer some loss of contact with reality. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I guess
during psychosis, a person may have difficult understanding what is real and what is not. Um, but that still doesn't prove that they don't know right from wrong. You know what I'm saying? So that's why it's like medically. So psychosis is a medical term. You know what I'm saying? But there we go back to that. The legal insanity is like more of a legal term, and it's just that's why I'm saying like a person can be perfect. That psychiatrist can be so perfect at doing his job and you know, diagnosing disorders, but insanity is not a disorder. So it's like two different things. So he could prove like he was in a state of psychosis, but to prove he didn't know right from wrong, that wouldn't be what, you know, that's not under what he. There's no way to diagnose that because it's not a diagnosis, it's not a disorder. You know what I'm saying? So that he's an expert in you know, in one thing, but this is, you see what I'm saying? It's just it's that's why it gets a little tricky because it's not a disorder that he's studied and learned and has a book on how to, you know, what are some of the symptoms and what, you know what I'm saying? So you have to like kind of pull from a bunch of different things. So like, okay, let's see if he's in a state of psychosis. So that's a part of it, but that still doesn't prove the whole thing, you know. So there's more to it. So you kind of have to like pull from, you know, different things and try to figure it out. But it's not like a, oh, this is it. Like with the DSM, this is the disorder. These are the symptoms. You have to have, you know, so many symptoms to fall under it, and it has to last so long, and blah blah blah. But you know, so but with insanity, there's no DSM. There's no book that tells you, okay, so this is what it has. It has to have this. It has to that. So you kind of have to say, okay, look at it more like the way you have to go about it is just there's no like for sure course of action on how you have to determine that. So it's very not so clear cut on, you know, how you have to determine it. So that's why I'm saying it's a little tricky because what one expert psychiatrist would go about you know, the process and how he would go about or he or she figuring out wouldn't necessarily be the way another one would have to do it because there's not a certain way you have to do it like with the DSM and like diagnosis or even like a medical for doctors, like there's certain things, you know, okay, this means this means that, but what means insanity? Like, yeah, it tells you, oh, it doesn't know the difference between right or wrong, but how can you tell that on a person, you know, like how do you prove that? How do you what are the guidelines? What are the I don't know. I can't really explain. Hopefully you guys are understanding what I'm saying, but so it's just that's why it's just tricky because there's no it's not a medical diagnosis, bottom line, you know? So you know, you try to get the experts that know, you know, that are experts on mental, you know, mental disorders, you know, experts on like psychotic disorders or mood disorders, or you know, to kind of, you know, kind of try to see where these people fall, you know. So, so like I said, you know, psychotic disorders are more of a chance that those are probably maybe, you know, could possibly fit under, you know, the insanity term or whatever. But that does just because somebody's schizophrenic or, you know, bipolar or whatever doesn't mean, or they were suffering from a psychotic break, doesn't necessarily mean that they were insane at the time. So that's where you gotta have to try to figure that out. and I know I probably just didn't make any sense because it's kind of hard to explain it. I bet you one of you guys could probably have explained it so much better than what I did. So I'm sorry. I understand in my head what I'm trying to, how I'm thinking, but like to be able to just explain it into words, sometimes I'm not the best at it. So hopefully you guys are understanding what I was trying to say. I'm not, like I said, an expert in this stuff or anything, but I just thought it was kind of a good subject. Just, the whole Timothy Jones was trying to use the insanity defense, and of course, he didn't win. And then I think the big thing with him was he was able to, like if they could recall like minute details of the crime long after its occurrence, is strong evidence of sanity at the time of the act. That they weren't insane. And then also, so he was able to, recall like the actual details. And then the fact that, he realized what he did was wrong. It was pretty obvious that he realized that, because instead of, maybe calling somebody to tell him, or, he hid it. He tried to hide it, So the fact that he tried to hide it, he's making plans on how to, basically get away with it. That shows you right there that he actually was aware that it was wrong. You know what I'm saying? So like, yeah, he had the mental defect. He very well could have been schizophrenic, and he definitely had a brain injury. So he had that first element, but the second one, he did know that what he did was wrong, and that's where the jury, seen that. Because, just certain things, like for instance, how he did try to cover it up, and he had, his notebook where he was trying to plan on how to, different ways to hide, get away with it. And then, the fact that, even the fact when he looked up that, scene on American History X, and he made a remark that he looked it up because he wanted to see, how to word it, basically, because he knew he was going to go to jail and wanted to kind of see what it was going to be like, or I forget how exactly he explained that, but that shows you right there that he knew he did something wrong that he was going to go to jail for, so so he knew he was breaking the law, and he did it. There was no proof that he couldn't control his impulse. You know what I'm saying? They weren't able to prove that he couldn't control his actions. Like, he had no control. So, so yeah. I think they made a good decision on that. Okay, well, I hope I didn't confuse you. I just kind of wanted to go over how, like, clinical insanity compared to legal insanity. But in reality, like, there is, like I said, that's not really a medical term, clinical insanity. But, you have things like psychosis, which is, it's kind of where you kind of lose contact with reality. Like I said, many factors could lead to psychosis. You have like genetics, trauma, substance use. So a lot of people will have a psychotic break from, substance use. For instance, like methamphetamine. A lot of people will stay up for days. And then, have a psychotic break. They, not only from the drug, but then from lack of sleep, and then, they start hallucinating, they start hearing voices, they start seeing things. You have auditory and visual hallucinations, with, drug use, substance use. So yeah, you could experience a psychotic break, from that, from injury, brain injury, mental health conditions, schizophrenics experience, psychotic breaks. So studies have shown that during a episode of psychosis, that actually the brain is basically in a state of stress overload. Okay, so I think that's it for this video. Hopefully I didn't confuse you, or I made somewhat sense, but I just kind of wanted to go over the difference between clinically insane and legally insane. All right, well, thanks for listening, everybody, and you guys have a great day. I'll talk to you next time. Bye.